Okay, this next book is by Rob Gainey, Rocking Your Stage Sound. This is a recent book. It was put out in 2010. It's published by Leonard Books. There may be a new edition of the book, but since it's 2010, pretty recent, I doubt it. But you might, if you want the new edition of the book and you're not going to use bookstore or something, I would check into it. But it's kind of unusual. It's a complementary to the sound reproduction manual, which I talked about earlier. But this book is covers those issues too, but it does it from the people that work in the industry. It's a product of people like myself that didn't go to sound school asking, when you want that concert, you're asking the sound man, well, why do you do this, or why do you do that? Or you get to talk to a band during an autograph session and you're asking questions of the band, or how do you do this, and how do you get that guitar sound, or where do you place your amps, and how do you get that unusual sound when you're live and stuff. All that is a product of this book, and you're getting different people in the industry, whether it's the band, the sound reproduction people, the people that work in the industry. So it's a good complementary book to the live sound manual, because you're actually getting information from professionals that have actually worked out there in the field and stuff. I can tell you, this book was put out in 2010. I was out there in the 1980s when I was helping some bands out with sound and stuff. And basically back then, I'll show you how much has changed between the 1980s and 2016 as far as music goes and stuff. Back then, if you wanted to learn how to run sound back in the 80s, you usually had to get friends with an ex-roadie, somebody that 60s dude, 1960 dude. You're talking somebody with long hair, used to wear tie-dye t-shirts, but that's over with by the 80s. But worked sound for a lot of the early bands back in the 60s, like Pink Floyd, there's Pink Floyd, Elvis Presley was still touring back in the 60s. But some of the 1960s, some of the big acts like Jimi Hendrix and were now not just club bands anymore, they were big stage performances. So to get to understand how to learn how to do that, you had to know somebody that was already working in the industry. And usually they got tired of touring. I mean, when you get involved in running stage performances and stuff, you don't want to spend your whole career touring. I mean, but usually about 4 or 5 years, and you're tired of it. You want to have regular home time, you want to get married, you want to have kids, and you don't want to spend your life on the road. But the first 5 years, you know, it's kind of fun, because you're meeting new people, you're going different places, you're seeing the different countries. If you go with a band that's touring all over the world, it's a good time, but it does get old. It's like trucking. I spent 15 years driving a truck, and it gets old. I mean, after you've seen all the country and stuff, and you don't want to be out there, it's nothing new, and you don't have any time at home, you don't want to, you're ready to settle down. But back in the 80s, to learn how to run monitors and run how sound equipment, you had to talk to the 1960s hippie who owned a business. And what he's doing now is he's doing small time acts. That are basically school auditoriums, just stuff. It's local work, it's part-time. When it's a festival, providing sound for a festival, he's bought, I'd say at least about $5,000 up to $10,000 for sound equipment, which isn't too much if you want to be in your own business. It's not arena acts, but you're not going to do arenas most of the time. Back then, he was just doing, schools, festivals, and stuff like that. And so you had to approach that person, and you had to say, hey man, I could, or you had to know a band. In my case, I knew a band. He was running sound for the band, providing amplifiers and sound for the band, and I volunteered to help him run monitors and stuff. And he was a volunteer. I wasn't being paid for it, but he was giving me everything he knew. If you treat them right, you're taking care of their equipment and stuff, and you're somebody that they can trust, because it is expensive equipment. He doesn't want it all busted up or torn up. He doesn't have the money to just all replace it at once. So, but they usually will teach you everything you need to know as far as sound reinforcement back then. It's a pretty good system, because they're not going to put you out there with their equipment if you don't know what you're doing. So, I mean, it was a good system. It was a good training system back in the 80s and stuff on how to learn sound and stuff. And it didn't involve a lot of money. It didn't involve going to spend a lot of money in sound school like it does now. But it's a good system. But the technology and stuff is evolving now and stuff, where it takes more than just running sound. You have to have, now there's big performance colleges and stuff as far as that are 2-year, 4-year programs that now cover a lot of that. And that's great, but if you don't have a lot of money, you're going to be just reading books. And the big time shows and stuff, you're going to put at least, could be between $30,000 to $80,000. I think Dallas Media Tech, which is an elite production school, you're talking, I think, $80,000 in school loans to go through their school. And it's got a pretty good size, pretty good fill rate. They're only going to take the cream of the crop. And the music industry is only going to take the cream of the crop too, because as I said earlier, it's pretty expensive sound equipment. They don't want people that don't know what they're doing. You're going to have to know what they're doing as far as that goes. But the book is great, as you learn stuff that you probably didn't know of from the individual bands and stuff, how they got their sound. A lot of times you'd wonder that when you listen to their albums and stuff. I always wondered why Def Leppard and Mutt Lange became a big production phenomenon, because his sound and use of compression and stuff created the Def Leppard sound. In fact, for a while they were saying, well, Def Leppard can't be anything without Mutt Lange, because he helped create the Def Leppard sound. That's how strong of a production man Mutt Lange was when it became the Def Leppard sound and stuff. So you're getting a little bit of that in the book as far as how that sound goes. And some of the producers of those, like somebody like Quincy Jones, or created a name for themselves because they could really mold the band's music just by turning the knobs. It helped create the sound. It's not creating the music, but it's creating the sound. And you get a little bit of clues as to how that works out. You're not writing the music, but you're helping create the sound, and that can be a big deal, especially when you come into marking the music and what people are listening to and stuff, and molding the bound sound into a product that you can market out there to the masses. So it's a pretty important book, because you're getting people work in the field and what they've learned and stuff. I would recommend buying all the books that I review, even if you're going to go to MediaTek or something like that, because it's got a pretty good fail rate. It's really sound production when you get into the big leagues is this, and this is what the killer is. It's engineering. You don't think that that's engineering, but that's what went into putting all that stuff together. A lot of them getting all the power amplifiers and all that stuff came from engineering. Some were MIT grads, some were Princeton grads that graduated in engineering or electronics engineering, or computer science is another one. That was Donald Passman's, I mean not Donald, another lighting man's background, because you have to be able to program those lights and stuff, and you have to create the equipment as things go on. So a lot of times the record companies would bring in engineers when their sound production and performance really wasn't their major, but they had to invent stuff as time went on to match what the band's goals were, and sound wasn't what they wanted to use on stage, especially when you had acts like Pink Floyd was one of those acts. Wasn't just the band's music, but what the band wanted to put on stage. Sometimes they had to create stuff to match what the band wanted to use out there, and you benefited from it. Today's times, you can go to a company like American DJ, and a lot of that stuff that was put out there back in the 60s and stuff, like laser lighting and stuff, you can actually afford for a small time act. That was a big deal back then, but they had to pay big bucks for all that to be created, because they had to start with creating it first and then testing it out on stage and stuff. So engineering was pretty important, and they wanted their money. It's pretty important as far as, especially in music industry in the early years. They're kind of, I guess I would consider unsung heroes, because a lot of people didn't know where all that stuff was coming from. They created the product and then they saw it up on stage, and people were like, well, where's all that coming from? And it's coming from an engineer, usually a computer scientist, electronics engineer, electrical engineer, and they were coming up with products, and the show became part of marketing it and stuff. But it all started out with engineering, and so if you're not somebody that's really a high IQ, I'm a slow learner, so I have to read books first before I do anything. As far as learning what I want to do. And I'm not an engineer. Most people aren't. It's somebody with a very high IQ, and that's a requirement to be an engineer, and most of us aren't. So your research and your what you want to do as far as music goes and stuff, you need to take time to read the books first before you go out and do it. If you're going to go to an elite sound school like MediaTek and stuff, I would strongly recommend reading these books that I've presented before you show up there, because you don't want to fail. And it is engineering. It's written by, some of the sound books are written by engineers, and a lot of us don't think like engineers do. So it takes time. I mean, you have to, one of the advantages to going to production school is you got a lab and you get to rehearse all that. As far as recording goes and everything else, you get to be a sound engineer. So you're running through the programs and stuff, turn the knobs and stuff, create the sound, and over a period of time you start learning it and stuff. But you want to have a good foundation before you go to the studio. You want to at least have a basic knowledge of what you're going to get when you turn this knob or that knob or whatever, because it is engineering. All right, that does it up for about Rob Gainey's book.